Seinfeld. You probably know him. He is a stand-up comedian, had a very popular TV show for a long time. Not doing either of those things a whole lot anymore, but I really like to listen to what comedians say about life. And I like to do that because in a lot of ways, they are kind of modern-day prophets. And what I mean by that is they can talk about things in a certain way that I can't talk about them, and they can get away with it because they're funny, and they're making a joke, and it's the butt of the joke that's the humor. And so they can say things that would otherwise really rile people up if somebody else said it, and they get laughs out of it. This is a picture from last weekend. Jerry Seinfeld was invited to give the commencement address at Duke University, and in doing so, he said a lot of things that are, I think, worthy of paying attention to. One of the things that Seinfeld said that was not so much funny as just real world, speaking truth, he said, we are proud, talking about society today, our culture today. He said, we are proud of what we should be embarrassed about, and we're embarrassed about what we should be proud of. And I thought a lot about that statement this week, and it makes a lot of sense, and I want to dive into it a little bit today. We are proud of what we should be embarrassed of, and embarrassed about what we should be proud of. Well, how do we know? That's a good question. How do we know the difference? Is there a difference? What about this whole conversation of being prideful versus being proud of what I have accomplished? We're in this series. We're on the front end of this series, and I thought about skipping this series because this is senior send-off day for one more week. I didn't do it on Mother's Day, and I didn't want to do it today. But I think this one's relevant, and so we're going to continue the series of poison. And why I'm talking about poison is really this. Because we're talking about sin, and sin is not just a barrier between me and God. Sin becomes something that infiltrates my life, that I may not even recognize that I'm drinking it in or swallowing it full sail, but it's there, and it becomes dangerous and destructive and deadly at times without us even knowing it sometimes. And so I've labeled this whole series as poison, and one of the most poisonous things that we can talk about is the idea of pride. Before we go down that road, I'd like for us to define it a little bit. And if we're talking about what we talk about when we talk about pride, I think we're talking about what's happening in Genesis chapter 3 that Avery read for us just a few minutes ago. For the longest time in Christianity, and I mean centuries of time in Christianity, the first sin in Genesis 3 was most often labeled as pride. Now, we can talk about a lot of different ways that may show up, or maybe a lot of different labels for that original sin, but here's what's happening. God has created the world and everything in it, and Genesis 1 and 2 tell us that story. And then in Genesis chapter 3, we don't know how many days or months or years have passed, but we know some time has. Adam and Eve are in the garden that God has created for them. In the middle of that garden are a couple of trees. One is the tree of knowing good and evil, and one is the tree of life. And God tells them, you can have fruit from any tree, anything in this garden, except for that one. Do not partake of the fruit of the tree of knowing good and evil. Your eyes will be opened, you will die, is kind of the instruction from God. And then the sneaky serpent comes in and asked them a pretty pointed question. Did God really say that you can't have this fruit? And Eve says, well, he didn't just say that we can't have it. He said, we can't even touch this fruit. We will surely die. And the serpent has a twist on the truth, and the twist on the truth is, God didn't mean that. He didn't mean that you're really going to die. See, look, eat the fruit. You didn't die. What God meant is that you will be like him. You will be excellent like him. Your eyes will be open. You'll know good and evil. You'll know the truth. God doesn't want you to be like him. He wants you to be subservient to him. And so don't eat the fruit. That's God's way of keeping you lower. But Eve looks, and she decides that this fruit looks good, and that it's good for food, and that she wants it. And so what we read a few minutes ago in Genesis 3 is that she takes the fruit from the tree and gives it to her husband, and they both eat there in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. And in verse 7, their eyes are opened. They recognize what's real in the world at that point. They see clearly, maybe for the first time, their nakedness, and they feel shame, and they start to blame each other. Why'd you eat the fruit, Adam? Well, it was the woman you gave me. God says, why'd you eat the fruit? It was a serpent, Eve says. And so they blame each other. They blame creation. They blame God. There's this whole downward spiral that happens in Genesis 3 at the beginning of the fall. What was the sin there? I think there's a very good case to be made that the sin there is a sin of pride. because they look and they decide for themselves that this is good for them, and maybe there's an inclination there that they want to be more like God, they want to be on level with God, excellent like Him, and so they take the fruit and they eat it. Then their eyes are opened. What we're talking about this morning when we talk about pride is basically the definition from 1700 years ago that Augustine gave us, which is the love of my own excellence. That's a good definition. Now, let's break it down for just a minute. Is it wrong? Is it bad to be excellent at something? Man, I hope not. I kind of want to be excellent at a few things. I want to excel in life in some areas. I hope you do too. That's good. That's good. But the love of my excellence may be the problem. Being too infatuated with my excellence. Maybe even driving down a little bit more, being too infatuated, too in love with my excelling somebody else. Then it can become an issue. That's Augustine's definition. A more recent one is from C.S. Lewis, and he describes pride as the ruthless, sleepless, unsmiling concentration on myself. That's what we're talking about when we talk about pride. Ruthless, unending focus on myself. This is where it leads. In our world, pride leads us to an endless calculation about our egos. It leads us to always trying to weigh things out and try to figure out, how am I going to benefit in this? We're always adding things up. You're looking and saying, am I getting the acclaim that I deserve? Am I getting the respect that I deserve? Do I get the appreciation that I think I deserve? Are people liking me as much as I wish that they were liking me? How am I being regarded? That's what pride asks. What do people think of me? How am I looking? How does this make me look? Am I doing better than everybody else? Those are the questions that pride leads us to, and everything is about that. Pride, love of my own excellence, is always saying, what about me? What about me? What do I get in this? What do I have to sacrifice in this? It's always, what about me? Christianity, on the other hand, and you know this, is not about me. Christianity is not the love of my own excellence. Christianity is the love of my neighbor, the love of my God. Even if my neighbor is my enemy, it's the love of my neighbors. Christianity says, what about them? And pride says, what about me? There's a pattern. And this pattern seems to be, I think, deeply ingrained within us because you and I are created for something deeper than what we experience in life a lot of times. We are created for life in God, and that's where we are most happy in life and find the most joy in life. But the pride pattern is that we keep going after happiness through substitutes for God. And we know there's this hole in our lives where God fits, but a lot of times we try to substitute false things for God's place in our lives, whether it's we're seeking for pleasure or for approval or wealth or love or power or security, whatever it is. You fill in the blank there for whatever you're kind of seeking after. But we try to substitute God. You know, where God fits in life, we try to find something else that will fit there and will bring us joy and will bring us happiness. And so there are good things in life. You know, love is a good thing. But whenever we try to make it the ultimate thing, it's a pride issue. Security is a good thing in life. God gives us security. It's a good thing in life. But whenever we make it our ultimate thing, we've created an idol, a prideful idol in our lives. So this is pride. This is the best definition I've got of pride. It is our love of our own excellence, our love of our own being better than somebody else, an uncompromising, ruthless, never-ending concentration on ourselves. But is that so bad? Really? That's the way of the world, right? That's how life works. That's how life is. That's what we got in this world. Is that so bad? I think it is. I think it is. And I want to share with you for a few minutes why pride is such a dangerous, dangerous thing. The ancients used the picture of a tree, and I think I got a picture of a tree somewhere here. Michael, there's a tree, and the roots are there on purpose. And so the tree is life. The tree is what we see in life. It's what we show the world. The tree is us. We are the tree, right? People are trees, and we show the world fruit that we bear in our lives. Trees are fed by a root system, and so the tree gets its nutrients and the water and what it needs to survive and bear fruit from the root system underneath, right? Basic science, we know that. Pride is the root system of a life that bears toxic fruit. This is not my understanding. This is an ancient way, centuries and centuries ago, way of understanding this. That pride is a root system that flows up into a tree that bears toxic fruit. And here's what it looks like. Here's what it looks like. Theologically, pride is dangerous because we, you and me, all of us, we are created to live in union with a good God who loves us more than we could even comprehend. That's what we get. That's the picture you get in Genesis 2, Genesis 1. We have this picture of a God who creates us not as servants or warriors, but God creates us out of his great love. That's God. He creates us in order to have a relationship with us, with his creation. And he is there in the garden, walking and talking with his beloved creation, Adam and Eve. If you leave the first pages of the Bible and go to the last pages of the Bible, you're going to find the same hope of God. It's there where John has this picture of a new heavens and a new earth and a new Jerusalem descending here. And he says there in Revelation, at the end, the dwelling place of God will be with man. And what a beautiful picture that is of God beginning something in Genesis 1 and finally fulfilling something at the end of Revelation, where his whole purpose here is that we are created to be in union with God, present with God, in fellowship with God, God dwelling with us and we dwelling with God. That's the idea, all right? Well, in this life, we kind of forget that sometimes, and we look for lesser goods to satisfy us. We look for, I don't know how you would describe it, the pleasures of the world, the security the world offers us, the way that John describes it, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life, those kinds of things. We look to substitute in God's place. Those lesser goods, and you know this, they fail to satisfy because we're not created for that. We're created for something deeper and better than that. When we try to fill in God's place in our lives with lesser goods, they never satisfy. But it's our pride that keeps us coming back and saying, well, maybe next time. Maybe if I had a little bit more of it, a little bit more time with it, maybe I can eventually satisfy my longings and my desires with something besides God. That's a theological problem. We keep going back for more, and we try to substitute various things in life for God, and we keep doing it over and over again, and eventually habits are formed. We're trying to fulfill God's place in our lives with something else, whether it's money or love or lust or whatever it may be, and habits are formed, and that becomes our character, and that becomes what is second nature to us. Good things are wrongly pursued, and sin accumulates, and our character is destroyed at times. Our being is destroyed at times. It's warped, and it's distorted, and it's all because of pride. That's a theological danger. There's also a very practical danger that I'd like for us to be aware of. And this is why pride is so destructive and dangerous and harmful, I think, to us. Number one is because it makes us fools. And let me explain why I chose that kind of language. It makes us fools. And it does that because pride keeps us from learning from our mistakes. You ever known somebody, or have you ever been somebody where it was never your fault? You know, bad things happened, mistakes were made, hard times came, difficult circumstances showed up, and it was never your fault. It was never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always something else's fault. It's never your fault. That's a pride answer. Pride keeps us from learning from our mistakes because we always justify our own behavior. Does that hit close to home for some of us? I hope so. Pride justifies and rationalizes why I'm not the problem in my life. That's pride. And so I never learn from my mistakes. And if I never learn from my mistakes, I never learn to be better. I'm always justifying myself and blaming other people or blaming something or somebody else. And so I keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, never learning from them. That's pride making me a fool. It also can make us evil. And I mean that. If pride is the root system that flows up into the tree that bears fruit in life, that's our lives, then pride is not one sin among many sins, but it's the first one, Genesis 3, and the worst, because it leads to anger, and it leads to greed, and it leads to lust, and it leads to us not acting how we ought to act. Does that ever happen to you? It's not just something on the surface, it's underneath. What comes into our heart overflows into our lives. That's pride. Makes us fools, makes us evil. And maybe, I guess I would say one of the more dangerous things about pride is that it hides itself from us. it hides itself. The more proud you are, the more prideful you are, the more, I guess, concerned with your own excellence that you may be, the less you're aware that pride may be an issue. The less you realize, the more excellent I view myself as, the less I realize that pride may really be an issue for me. It's the carbon monoxide of sin. It's odorless. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You don't know it's there until maybe it's just about too late. It hides itself, and it's dangerous and destructive before you even know it. Maybe one of the things that really should concern us is that pride is often made worse by religion. If you got a Bible, Luke 18 is a great example of this. I want to share with just this one passage with you. This is a story of Jesus in Luke 18 where he describes a Pharisee who's supposed to be the very, very religious person in that day, and they are, for good reason. They wanted to obey the laws and wanted to find the truth and live by the truth and great, noble beginnings, but it became very hypocritical at times, judgmental at times. And so Jesus tells a story, and it begins in Luke 18, verse 9. He told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. This is pride. All right, when we read those words, we should say, Jesus told this story to people who had a pride problem, and they didn't even know it yet. All right? They were trusting in themselves. They are excellent. For their own righteousness, they are excellent. More than others, treating others with contempt. We are better than them. That's pride. This is a story about pride. And here's the story. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. All right, well, everybody in the world would have known that the Pharisee is the righteous one, the holy one, the pious one, who has given his life to follow the will, the word, the law of God better than anybody else. Great. The tax collector is the guy nobody wants to talk to. He's a traitor. He's hated by most of his fellow folks there. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to be around him. So you got a Pharisee, holy, righteous, pious, and you got a tax collector who's the opposite of those things. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus. Hey, do me a favor. Count how many times he talks about himself in this prayer. This is a pride prayer. Count how many times he talks about himself. Remember, pride is my love of my own excellence. I think this guy's got it. This is the prayer. God, I thank you that I am not like others. I'm better than them. Extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even like that tax collector over there. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. That's great. Sounds good. You talked about yourself a lot. That's pride. You're concerned with your own excellence. That is pride. You love that you tithe all that you get and you fast twice a week, and you love that you're not like everybody else, especially that ugly old tax collector over there. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you this, Jesus said, one man went down to his house justified rather than the other. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. I don't know about you, but if I didn't know the whole history of the scribes and the Pharisees and the tax collectors, and you asked me to go down to the temple that day, and just by knowing who they were, one's a tax collector who makes his living by collecting taxes from the Jews for Rome, and by the way, he pads his own pockets with their money. And the other guy is a Pharisee who looks righteous and seems very pious in his life and very holy and a religious kind of person. And he said, which one of those is maybe more pleasing to God? I'll be honest with you, I would probably say the Pharisee is. If I didn't know any better, I'd probably pick him. And I think he knows that. And he carries himself that way because Jesus is telling the story to people who have a pride problem. They're trusting in themselves that they are righteous, that they are excellent, that they are holy, and they look down at other people. That's pride. It's pride that makes this man in Jesus' story say, I thank you, God, that I'm not like him. I'm holy, I'm righteous, I'm pure, I'm sinless. I thank you, God, that I'm not like the rest of these sinners you've put me around. It's pride. It's often made worse by religion, because religion, if we're going to follow Jesus, it means that we're striving to do better, right? That's religion. We strive to follow Jesus. We, like Paul writes, we strive to put off the old, bad, sinful, dangerous, destructive behaviors to put on the new, the good, right? We want to do away with anger and be more kind. We want to do away with lust and be more loving. We want to do away with our greed and be more generous. That's what we do. That's good. And we want to make progress in those disciplines. We want to be more virtuous kind of people. But the danger of pride is that we strive for those virtues, and as we start to achieve those virtues, we kind of look back and we look down on folks who we perceive to be not really where we are right now. That's dangerous. It's pride. That's a love of our own excellence and a little bit of contempt for everybody else. I still see this today. I see this today and it's one of those things about pride that maybe gets us before we even know it, because it hides itself from us. But pride's an issue. Pride often leads to destruction. And I'll tell you what, I've been preaching, I guess, for 17 years now. And just by virtue of the job, people come to the office, people reach out and say, I've got this issue. And typically, here's how the conversation goes. Hey, I got this going on in my life. I'm struggling with fill in the blank. I've got an addiction to, you name it, whatever it is. I can't quit flying off the handle in anger and raging at my spouse. I can't quit looking at the websites. I know it's wrong. I shouldn't do it. I can't put the bottle down. I know it's causing a lot of problems. I just can't do it. The list is endless, right? Never one time have I had somebody reach out to me, come to my office and sit down and say, hey, I'm dealing with a real issue of pride. Not one time. My preacher growing up is back there. He's 50 years in the same congregation. And I would bet when you talk to him later, he would probably say the same thing. People come to us and they say, here's the issue. Here's how it's showing up in my life. It's lust, it's greed, it's anger, it's whatever it is. But we never label it as pride. And we don't label it as pride, I think, because pride is so good at hiding itself from us. The more proud we are, the less we realize it before maybe it's pretty close to too late. And so the tree's got to be cut down, right? You got a plant in your yard. You want to get done with it. It doesn't do you any good to go out and just nibble off some of the twigs on the outside of the bush, right? It's going to keep growing back. It's going to keep growing. What you got to do is cut the thing down, grind up the stump, root out the weeds, or get the roots uprooted, and then that thing will stop growing. That's what we're talking about here. It's pride, and it fuels all the other vices in our lives. So that leads to a good question. What in the world do we do about it? Is there a cure for pride? Well, I think that there is a cure. Pride at its heart is a failure to accept dependence on God gracefully and gratefully. It's a failure for us to really see ourselves in relation to God. It's a failure for us to see that we are dependent minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day on what we have received and what we are receiving. Wherever we are in life, there's a pretty good chance it's related to our lineage, our upbringing, our experiences in life, what we have gone through before, our circumstances, whatever it is. We're dependent a lot of times on who we are, where we came from, and what we have been through. But at the same time, there's a good kind of self-determining independence that I think we can be aware of. And what I mean by that is we got an ability to choose for ourselves what we do. And that's good. We use that freedom of choice. We're free will agents. We use that freedom of choice to decide what we do in life, whether we go down a good path or a bad path, whether we seek to be conformed to the world or be conformed into the image of God. It's our choice. And that's good for us. And here's the good news about pride. We can use our self-determining independence. We can use our ability to make our own choices, to choose what we do, to decide what path we go down. We can choose to humble ourselves. That's the biblical call. That's in James chapter 4. Humble yourself in the sight of God, and he will lift you up. We can choose to humble ourselves. In the words of Jesus we read earlier, If we want to really find what life is, we want to find what life is about and what we should be doing with our lives, then we lose ourselves if we want to find ourselves. And if you're paying attention to what I just said there, lose myself so that I can find myself, there is zero mention of my own love for my own excellence. That goes out the window. That's the axe that's laid to the root of pride, is losing ourselves to find ourselves, humbling ourselves in the sight of the Lord, emptying ourselves in the model of Jesus, who did exactly that, to come and give his life for us. And so the cure for pride is to humble yourself and to lose yourself. But if you're like me, that sounds good on paper. That's every bit of that's biblical. But what do I take away from it? Humble yourself and lose yourself. What does that even mean for me? Yeah, I'm going to be a more humble person. I'm going to be a more lost person. What does that even mean? How do I live that out? What are some takeaways? Well, glad you asked, because I got 4 for you. Here's some steps. These are all steps that are engineered to help us create some kind of humble dependence on God, to move away from pride, which we will define again as my love of my own excellence. These are 4 practical things that you can start doing right now. Like in the pew, you can do a couple of these. When you walk out of this room this morning, you can start like immediately doing some of these things. Number 1 on my list, and I would say if you're going to start anywhere, start there. It's number 1 for a reason. Examine yourself every day. And when I say examine yourself every day, I mean you are taking a deep, oftentimes dark look into your life to try to find out where in the world did I prioritize myself over other people today? Where did I act in a way to just seek approval from people so that they will see how excellent I am today? When did I do that? That's how a habit of pride is formed. Where today did I act out of a desire to be recognized for the goodness that I do? Where did I speak and act in a way that I just want people to recognize how excellent I am? If you can get a pretty good answer to that question, I think you have a pretty good idea of where to start rooting out pride in your life. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to regularly engage in acts of service. Now, it's easy, and pride says, why should I do that? Shouldn't they do that for themselves? Well, okay. That's pride speaking. But regularly engaging in acts of service for other people will help shift the focus from myself to somebody else. And maybe over time, it takes time, maybe over time I become less in love with my own personal excellence, and I learn to love my neighbor as myself a little bit more. Third on my list, make a habit of recognizing and affirming the talents and the contributions of other people. Now, if you are a prideful person, you know it, because right when I said that hit you, didn't it? It hit you. Because the last thing a prideful person wants to do is recognize the talents and the contributions of somebody else, their excellencies. You don't want to do that. Now, you may do it. You may do it. A prideful person may do that because it makes them look good. Look how noble they are and selfless they are, and look how humble they are because they recognize the talents and the contributions and the abilities, the excellencies of somebody else. But it's still for a selfish motive, right? I'm talking about honestly, humbly, sincerely, find a way to recognize, make a habit of affirming and recognizing the contributions, talents, excellencies of somebody else. It removes the focus from yourself. Fourth, what about some prayers that specifically address the pride issues that you find in your self-examination every day? And maybe you recognize there may be blind spots in your life, and you want to pray prayers that will make you more open to recognizing those spots. And when you recognize those spots of pride in your life, you are more able to overcome them. And so back to Mr. Seinfeld, who said last week, in our world today, we are proud of what we should be embarrassed about and embarrassed about what we should be proud of. Do you find places in your life where there are things that you're proud of that you shouldn't be? Do you find places in your life, in other words, where you are too much in love with your own excellencies, where you care too much about being better than other people? That's pride. Are you someone who has a hard time learning from your mistakes because it's always somebody else's fault. It's not yours. That's pride. Are you somebody who has a hard time overcoming those traps because you're so caught up on figuring out how you're not the bad guy, and it's not you or your family, it's somebody else or something else? That's pride. Can you pinpoint those things and stop that kind of prideful flow in life, prideful pattern in life? Are you somebody who recognizes that maybe the sins that plague your life are not really the issue, it's a deeper problem of pride that sprouts up into those kinds of things? Can you get the feeling today maybe that there is a pride problem in your life, and you don't label it as that, and you don't talk about it, and we don't discuss it because it hides itself from us so well? Are we proud of what we should be embarrassed about? Or are we embarrassed about what we should be proud of? Maybe it's time to make some of these changes in our lives. Here's what I think is at the root of pride. The root of pride is the desire to be loved. That's what it is. The root of pride is that I want people to love me, and I want people to care about me, and I want people to love me so much that I got to prove to them how excellent I am, how good I am, how righteous I am, holy I am, humble I am. The list goes on, right? And it's all because I want people to love me. I want people to love me. And so the best way that I know of to cure pride is to know that you are loved regardless of how excellent you are. The Pharisee probably seems like the one who was very excellent in Luke chapter 18, but it was the tax collector who went home justified. It's God, through Jesus, who says in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world," that's us, all of us, "that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life." In Paul's language, Paul says it's not that you were good or excellent, noble. It's not that you were just so pious and righteous and holy. In Romans, Paul says, while we were yet sinners, God showed his love for us. And he shows his love for us by Jesus emptying himself, going to the cross, dying the death of a slave, so that we may have life, showing his great love for us, and showing us through that great love how we are to love others and how we are to live our lives. The life of Jesus is a life of losing himself to find life. The life of Jesus is emptying of himself, humbling himself, and allowing God to be the one who lifts him up. And that's the example of our lives. That's what our lives should look like. It's the pattern that we should follow. Pride gets in the way. Pride's the first thing that got in the way of that kind of life. It's the worst thing that gets in the way of that kind of life. It makes us fools. It makes us evil. It hides itself from us. But it is a vice that you and I can overcome by examining ourselves, by questioning ourselves, by regularly serving other people, by asking God's help in pinpointing the pride problems in our lives, by thinking about the good things that other people give to us, the excellent things that other people do in life. We can overcome pride by humbling ourselves, losing our lives if we want to find what it means to really live. What it means to really live. And so this morning, I don't know where it finds you. My hope is that if there are some drops of poison in your life, that these sermons help you pinpoint where they are so that you can remove them. And maybe that's where you are this morning. In fact, look, I know that's where we all are. It shows up in different ways, but we all struggle with a little bit of a pride issue at times. It shows up in different ways. Maybe you got a grasp on it, maybe you don't, but maybe today is the day that you decide, I'm going to find out where it is, and I'm going to uproot the thing. I'm going to find out where it is, and I'm going to get rid of it. It's disastrous, it's destructive, it becomes deadly, and sometimes that happens before we even know it. And so let's start pinpointing the pride poison in our lives today. Maybe you're here and you're ready to become a Christian.